All right, y'all, we are recording. Welcome to Gay's Grab Bag. Today I have a very illustrious guest. The very first review we ever done, the subject of our first review, that's partly lost media, lost into chthonic mists of time. The one and only Adam, I never knew, Adam Lew's Rienspects.
Rienspects, but it's a pseudonym,
Rienspects.
so yeah, I won't get too offended.
Sorry, the Rienspects, the Germanic Rienspects.
Yep.
Brother, welcome.
Thank you for having me. An honor to be here on the Sidebar podcast. I will say to your audience who is listening right now, your vast audience of intellectuals, that I apologize in advance. My voice is a little bit scratchy. I have strep throat right now, but it's actually a bit of an avant-garde feature that I have strep throat, because me and Gabe felt, well, how can we illustrate the Apollonian Cthonian divide better than by having our intellectual, scintillating conversation interrupted by sounds of bile and snot and mucus, kind of bubbling up in my throat. So it was an artistic choice on our part for me to be deathly ill today.
Yeah, this is a performance podcast where the chthonic is getting its revenge. Nature is getting its revenge upon you.
Yeah, so every time I wheeze or snort, like, reflect on the bubbling bile of Cthonian, muck that we all arise from, as Paglia would say.
Exactly. I took a similar route. The night prior, I slept with a lady of the night, so I got some chlamydia going on right now. So the feminine nature, yes, mother. Right now, my right testicle is burning like a motherfucker. Right,
the testicle, really?
Yes.
Oh wow.
Yes. Every time I pee, man, it's just the right one. It's like 1,000 little queen ants biting on it.
Oh my god! Yeah, wow. Yeah, no, your Chthonian issues blow mine out of the water.
Listen, we suffer for our art. All right, it's the spectacle of pain.
Absolutely.
The things we do for our audience. And dear audience, before we come into today's topic, since I am suffering, I need I need medical bills I need to have finance to pay for my bills to get rid of this chlamydia. But I need money because you need to pay for the Patreon. You know why? Because I need legal bills. That's right. As everyone knows, my Twitter account has been ravaged by the evil that is Todd Howard. And thankfully, my cousin, as a runaround, has been, in my absence, my good Croatian cousin back in the homeland, has been running a pseudo account in my name. And thankfully, good for him. I'm totally unrelated in any way, Twitter admins, all of you who are listening right now. Just that he's my good cousin who is running the account currently. Now, if you want me, listen, I may have a junior associate discount with Baltic Incorporated, but still, a 0.005 discount is not enough to hire the best Michelin lawyer in New York. Not even our $15 a month from Peter Thiel is enough. We need both Lord Baltic and the greatest lawyer in New York with the greatest VP in Silicon Valley. Only their powers combined can defeat Todd Howard and bring me back my Twitter account. So, my little tuggers, it's time to pay for my STD bills, and pay for my Twitter account. This is officially a FinDom podcast as well.
Yeah, I just emailed Peter Thiel. I said, Gabe's balls really burn right now. Can you have some antibiotics droned over to him? And he said, yeah, no problem. So he's sending them over.
Oh, P.S. Can you please DM Elon to get him his Twitter account back? Anyway, so today we're talking too much about men. So today's subject, I was inspired very recently because I've been accused. Can you believe this? I have been accused of not knowing much about women. There's been slander all across the internet. I know, right? Me? The Gabriel Sinclair, the romantic himself? I'm very much in tune both the anima and anime, right? Jung style. So today I want to prove that with you inspired me. You made this beautiful tweet on Camille Paglia's birthday, and it was a beautiful little homage. You read an excerpt from her book. So in this belated birthday, because women are always late for things, so in this nature of my feminine nature, which I know very well, this Camille Paglia birthday pod is late as well. And so today we're going to be discussing sexual personae and the greater works of the one, the only, the magisterial bitch queen of contrarianism, Camille Paglia.
Absolutely. I can't wait.
So Adam, to start us off, to start this very classy podcast off, I wanted to ask you, what drew you into Camille Paglia? What was your exposure to Camille Paglia, and how has she influenced you?
What a lovely question. So, and I do feel in this discussion we should, we're cracking a couple jokes early on. That's lovely. But Paglia to me should be treated as a borderline religious figure. I feel she should be treated as a kind of modern visionary. I think she should be protected by the world. She should be given big golden robes to wear out in public and stuff. And I think this discussion we should try to be reverent about her, because as much as Paglia is a genius intellectual, as much as she has created a manifesto that spans the entire range of Western culture, she's also a personality. And the reason I love her so much personally, and what drew me to her when I first, I stumbled on a couple videos of her giving these fiery lectures and talks, is just how much she loves life. She has this very Italian just love of living and art and food and culture and sports and football and construction and buildings and race cars. And she has this brilliant wisdom and a mature intelligence, but such a childlike fascination with the world that I really feel she's actually a role model to me in just how to view the world, to always be in this state of amazement and conscious appreciation and analysis. And so I stumbled upon her through some of these videos and then said, wow, I should actually read her work. And the first thing I read was Sexual Personae. And I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, the first time I read Sexual Personae, the first time I read that first chapter, because the thing about this book is that she wanted the first chapter to be this kind of intro, this manifesto, and she compares it to this intense, brooding symphony piece that she wanted the whole book to open with, where it's almost difficult to describe what she does. The best way I can describe it is she looks at all of human history almost as if it's a work of literature. And she comes up with this beautiful artistic, she doesn't come up with it, but she sort of advances this beautiful artistic contrast between the Apollonian and the Dionysian, or the Apollonian and the Chthonian, as she refers to it. And we'll go into that. And she explains how the wrestling of these two forces has spurned everything basically beautiful and interesting in all of human history. And I think people make a mistake in thinking that these two forces are oppositional, that they're not necessarily oppositional or one or the other, at war with each other. It's more like they can exist. They're just always sort of bumping on each other and advancing each other. It's very much yin and yang, they need each other in a way. One will never win over the other one necessarily, or one should not win over the other one. So I think today what I'd love to do is read some of these passages from the opening chapter, and we go from there. And if you're listening to this, you'll get a nice kind of taste of her incredible prose, her brilliant, deep ideas that, whether they're true or not, I don't care. They force you to think about life and human history in totally new ways. And then you'll hear me and my good friend Gabriel discussing them.
Sounds like a plan to me.
Beautiful. Should we go right in, or are there other things you want to talk about Paglia in general, kind of before we get started?
Well, actually, you know what? Recite a first verse. I want to be introduced to the woman. I want her to be introduced by her work first. Then we'll get to the woman herself.
Beautiful. So, I mean, we got to just read the first paragraph here. So she says, "In the beginning was nature, the background from which and against our ideas of God were formed. Nature remains the supreme moral problem. We cannot hope to understand sex and gender until we clarify our attitude towards nature. Sex is a subset to nature. Sex is the natural in man." And then skipping a little bit down, she has this beautiful line. She says, human beings are not nature's favorites. We are merely one of a multitude of species upon which nature indiscriminately exerts its force. Nature has a master agenda we can only dimly know. What do you think of that, Gabe?
Well, her view on nature and all this, well, her writing style, number one, is very, you notice this contrast. She doesn't care about whether it's correct. It's about forcing you believe her no matter what she is saying, because she believes it, right? She has this immense vultitude of being, of her personality, and everything she writes, there's a sense of musicality to this. So when she says nature, she disagrees with the kind of shallowness, because she describes nature like all the poets describing nature. She literally says they just kind of worshiping the thin skin around true nature. There's little beautiful trees and all this. It's a thin. She even uses the word thin skin of the bubbling, groveling, slimy, porpoise earth. And so she personifies the earth as something that we are constantly struggling against to push away from. And of course, I have to mention, obviously, the one and only Oswald Spengler, who influenced this book, by the way. She, in her collection, when she talks about the abandoned preface to Sexual Personae, her views on history are actually highly inspired by Vico Gabenu, I believe his name is. Shout out to Oswald. Oswald Spengler Alkalite. He just did a Twitter space on him. The cyclical historians, and of course, de Tocqueville, Alex de Tocqueville, I forget the Frenchman, and obviously Spengler. And you can see the Spengler influence because in Spengler, the Faustian spirit, the Western spirit, is focused on going furthest away from the earth as can. It's an upward spirit. If you look at the cathedrals of Catholic art, it's going upwards towards the sky, towards away from the earth. It's the ultimate revelation. It's the ultimate protest against nature. Is man? I am my own creator. So I could definitely see the sprinklings of Spengler within this paragraph here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what's so, I think honestly that kind of like a midwit person who reads Paglia will like spend their entire time like like equivocating on like these little things like, oh, I don't think that's true. I think she's being too broad. I think she, they'll like not get it. They'll find these little tiny issues they have with it, like everything she says. But you're exactly right. The voice here is an exercise in loudly and proudly proclaiming broad truths. And again, I think it's a kind of literary exercise, which is what makes the book so unique. Like Harold Bloom, for example, and I believe this very strongly, maintained that with literature, the best interpretation of the great books in history is an artful misinterpretation by the reader, right? Which is to say, like, you must take these great works and you must interpret it in a way that is somewhat subjective and draws something out of you and involves your own consciousness with it, right? In an artful way. This is the most artful interpretation of human history that I've ever read.
Agreed. And the thing she's so fluid with it too. She's not afraid. She'll make up these metaphors, like how the womb tomb, the womb. I mean, a woman's body is inherently almost like a place of worship. It is both a shrine and a tomb. And then she'll have this beautiful block of like scholarly like an analysis, and then she'll end it with a line that like a man's sperm is his assault troops that are raiding this sacred citadel, the woman's vagina. And she'll just blast it out, and she has such again this idea of playfulness, and she can understand the hard concrete, very stuffy academia of the history of Greece and everything like this. But she breathes life into it. I watched this one interview with her with some bozo. She was complaining about the misogyny of rock and roll, and she's like, "Listen, I view myself as a rock star. The way Eddie Van Halen plays with the guitar, I do it with my writing. I feel like I write lyrics." And you can definitely feel this sense of lyricism, this idea of imbuing information with a certain of vigor, of energy, of vitality, of energy. You feel it within this text because the way she has these beautiful one-liners. It's like they curl into like these one-liners. They curl into the main text itself, and they're like skeleton tees. When she says, love is a crowded theater, or the male exists less when he is entered every time he enters into a woman, he exits less than what he was before he entered. So you have this chunk of text and these beautiful one-liners that curl back into the main text. It's like, it literally is like a song, because the greatest songs, a one lyric can basically unlock the rest of the song. And from that one lyric alone, you understand the song in its entirety. And that's how I feel like with this text.
Yeah, it's almost like there's almost too many of them. Like you can almost go to the bottom of every single paragraph in this book, and it's a banger. It's just a beautiful line. I mean, seriously, like she is the master of writing a complex, winding paragraph and then ending it with just a perfect, beautiful line, that summarizes and articulates what she said before. If you're trying to write, if you're trying to become a better writer, read Paglia. And if you want to become a great writer, I would say steal what Paglia did, which if you listen to some interviews about how she developed her own writing skill, she would read other writers. And when she found a line that she particularly liked, she would write it down by hand in a journal, in a notebook. So she would trace it. She'd have that line come from her and see what it would be like to write that out. And I think that's an excellent exercise, because it kind of tricks your brain into thinking you came up with it in a way. It tricks your brain into thinking along the same patterns, that the author must have been thinking along.
Yeah, I mean, she admits that, she was heavily inspired by Oscar Wilde's aphorisms, the aphorisms of both Oscar Wilde and Nietzsche,
Mm-hmm.
because both these men can write super elegantly, but then they can just have a collection of one-liners. That's what they are, one-liners. And, she was heavily inspired by that. And I think she even said that she wrote the entire first draft of Sexual Persona by hand, which is crazy to think about.
Incredible.
But you can tell that the level of craftsmanship went into it.
Absolutely.
And the idea of, like she'll have this beautiful line of block a little later on. She'll talk about like how men are fundamentally terrified of women, how women are internal and men are artificial. Men are the hollow animal, as Nietzsche said. And that when a man goes before a woman, and at the end of the day, she's always prepared for sexuality. She doesn't need sex; she is sex. With a man, if he can't get it up, if he's standing before this void, this terror, the terror of looking into a vagina for a first time, there's a terror, there's a sense of judgment when you look into a woman's vagina for the first time. She cites Freud's idea of the Medusa, right? The pubic hairs of a woman's vagina is much like the Medusian snakes turning you into stone, which is actually a beautiful metaphor. And then she'll say all of this, and then a beautiful one-liner about men. Men are able to piss on a campfire, and that gives them strength and dominance over nature. If a woman tries to piss on a campfire, all she's going to get is steamed hams, basically.
Yeah. So let's go through these quotes, because I think going through them will cover a lot of this ground in the way she would want it covered, right? In a kind of like progressive way as she builds her worldview,
Right.
So here's the next one. This is, I think, the way Paglia essentially views life, which as a recovering lib, I think that essentially the liberal worldview, or the Rousseauist worldview that she describes here, is that man was born free and everywhere he's in chains, right? That basically we would otherwise be these kind of pure, free, happy blank slates. But because society is so fucked up, because society is so dark, we adopt all these attitudes and these neuroses and these criminal behaviors, which she says is completely wrong. So here's her writing. She says, Rousseau rejects original sin, Christianity's pessimistic view of man, born unclean with a propensity for evil. Rousseau's idea derived from Locke of man's innate goodness leads to social environmentalism, now the dominant ethic of American human service, penal codes, and behaviorist therapies. It assumes that aggression, violence, and crime come from social deprivation, a poor neighborhood, a bad home. And so essentially she's saying this is not true. The reality is that nature, which she describes earlier on, imbues us with the potential for horrifying violence and for antisocial behavior. And it's society that restrains us from that. And there's, again, a beautiful banger one-liner, like you mentioned. She kind of closes the section saying, in other words, liberalism defines government as tyrant father, but demands it behave as nurturant mother. So she's always connecting this to our kind of Freudian pathologies, right? The liberal feels like it's just society that makes everybody bad. It's just these misogynistic, racist, whatever attitudes in society, if only we could correct them. So in other words, society is a tyrant, but it wants this tyrant to behave as a nurturant mother, to breastfeed it with, welfare and earned income tax credits and student loan forgiveness, etc.
Yeah, it's the idea of construct. She actually, her citations. She's very interesting. She reminds me, you guys, not you, you the audience. Yes, you. I know you haven't clicked on their Patreon yet. Click on it, motherfucker. Um, anyway, she reminds me of a certain figure, honestly, with this idea of constantly citing against this idea of constructed nature, this quote unquote nature of, oh, we are imposed, society made it this way, we have no instigation, we are rootless, we are just a gaseous bubble being blown by the wind. She says no. She says nature is internal. Energy is internal. Energy has always existed. And she cites Heraclitus, the man who believed all life, all energy is fire. And
Hmm.
fire is just reconverted to another energy. You cannot truly kill off fire because you cannot kill the sun. Destruction of the sun just causes even more excessive energy. And she says, her line of thought goes from Hobbes, which is very interesting, the very realist first political realist of reality of politics, to Nietzsche and then to Freud. She even mentions that. Hold on, I actually wrote down all of her one-liners. She says something along the lines of, every time we say nature is beautiful, we are saying a
Hmm.
prayer, fingering our worry beads. Yeah, again, there's that Catholic element of it, and or how she says, when we are walking through life, we are plowing through the bones of our ancestors, because the bones of life of civilizations before us are the fertilizer of the soil we grew up in. And you see this all the time amongst the libs. And she highly reminds me of this certain political figure in our scene of ours, an old guy, he's dead now. She reminds me of this pagan British dude named Jonathan Bowden.
Hmm.
He was a very interesting guy in the British scene, and in a lot of ways, because he's like the dissident right wing guy, but he was a theater kid. He would give these great speeches about fire and energy and the British being, and then he
Hmm.
would do a 2 hour lecture on a puppet show, an old British puppet show, and imbued with such energy. And this idea of both the man who is embodied with this versus the feminine, because she was very perform. Notice she wasn't out the womb like this, because she says the most formative parts of her life was studying Amelia Earhart and dressing up like Napoleon when she was like 9.
Hmm. Hmm.
So there's this idea with Paglia of this idea of she gets in tune with her nature, and she says she was scared of men. She was scared of men until she hit puberty, and then this was in her Charlie Rose interview, and when she says that the feminist establishment neglects our physical bodies. She says all the way back in the 90s, much less the feminism of now. She says we as a society neglect our bodies. The problem with the Rousseauians is that Rousseau projected this warped idea of Apollonianism. It was so nature is not supposed to be completely ripped off. It's supposed to be conquered, but it's not supposed to be ripped away from. It's like gravity. You can we need gravity. Yes, you can fall to your death in a canyon, right? But to live without gravity is to live without a proper grounded existence. You feel?
I do feel absolutely, and you know what? Subjectively, I mean, it's such a like we live in such atomized times. We live in times when I think men and women, everybody feels so disconnected from social fabric. Everybody feels disconnected from some kind of greater spiritual understanding. And I think there's a lot of people like me, maybe, who they don't want to prescribe whole cloth to any kind of fundamentalist religious orthodoxy, or they find it difficult to do that, but they want to feel that they belong in some way in this world. They want to understand their place in the world in a greater sense. And that's really what she's doing here. I mean, I feel that by kind of outlining this beautiful literary interpretation of history and of the point of society and the beautiful contrasts between men and women, she sort of makes you feel like you belong on earth, like you are a part of the earth. There's a real kind of spiritual element to this writing, right, where there's a divine aspect of masculine and feminine power and authority and chaos, and it's a way to see yourself within that world, and feel like you belong here and not like you're, just some kind of strange unit walking around.
It gives the world weight. It's
Yeah.
weighty. Even her jokes have a very profound sense of, oh shit, that's actually really true, and you
Hmm.
feel it not in your head, it's beneath the mind, it's within your chest. You feel what she's saying.
Hmm. Mhm. Yeah, we should really quick. So if someone's listening and they're a little lost, the essential contrast here that Paglia draws is that, so me and Gabe just talked about nature and society and what nature is versus the Rousseauist view versus the her view, which is that nature is this chaotic, uncontrollable Chthonian mess, and that we build from that into the Apollonian. So essentially, what that contrast is she associates femininity with the Chthonian and with nature. So she talks about how for early civilizations, for early people, early pagan cultures, women's procreative abilities would have seemed like magical. They would have seemed surreal. The fact that women can just give birth. Many of these really early proto-human societies would not have put two and two together that semen is leading to impregnation. They would have just seen women as these mysterious, ethereal beings that can generate life, generate themselves, right? You come from a woman. That's man's entire pathology. Um, and so she associates that. So on one side of it, we have nature and woman and the Chthonian, and it's chaotic and it's procreative and it's messy and it dissolves boundaries. And then on the other side, we have the Apollonian, which she associates with men, which is the escape from nature, which is the way that we construct clean rigidity around laws, society, architecture, banking, ethics, Christianity, sin, forgiveness, all the art, everything that we do to kind of escape from nature, to feel like we have some control over the world, over society, is the Apollonian. So that is the central contrast, right? And as she goes throughout the book, sexual personae, right? What that title means are these personalities, these sexual gendered personalities. And she often describes how certain personalities are combinations or inversions of these. So, for example, like I said, it's not always one or the other. Like the Birth of Venus, the beautiful Botticelli painting, is an Apollonian representation of femininity, right? So even though Apollonian is associated with the male, she explains that in this painting, you see a depthless ocean, right? A clear, beautiful crystal ocean, beautiful wind that seems clear and purifying. A woman arises through the shell with clean blonde hair and bright colors. And it's an Apollonian, in other words, like a positive, clean, sinless portrayal of femininity, right? Even though it's portraying a feminine figure, So again, these two forces sort of interestingly circle different pieces of art and artwork, and it's not always one or the other, but that is the central contrast.
Well, the birth of Venus is actually a great idea because she says, Venus is solipsistic and navel gazing. Femaleness is self-referential and self-replicating. And she says all these female figures. But Venus buzzes to herself, queen for all days, women for all seasons. She sleeps. She is hibernation and harvest, the turning wheel of the year. The egg-shaped Venus thinks in circles, mind under matter. And she talks about this a lot, actually, about how what you mentioned about men before we were conscious, before we were able to associate cause and effect, when we were to, hey, I'm really horny, let me stick my meat in this weird flappy meat hole you have between your legs. And oh shit, she's acting all weird. She's throwing up. Her belly is growing. What the hell is this? She's being really annoying and screaming in pain and agony. And then you see this weird baby thing, and you have this weird snake umbilical cord around its neck. And it's women as a horror story, right? Because
Mm.
women are in nature. Another great one of her one-liners is birth is nature getting her own way, right? And birth is nature getting her own way, which is that women, in trying to defy her nature, birth always wins out in the end. It's something you have to say yes or no, but you cannot. By saying yes or no to giving birth, the haunting of birth, the hauntology of birth will still haunt women as a concept no matter what. You cannot disconnect women from the cycles of nature, from the cycle of birth, because she is nature. And for the man, she said this other absolutely banger line to reference to Medusa. I wrote this down. Where is it? Let's see, love is it? No. She's already reversing herself. No. Everybody is. Hold on, one second. This actually is a banger line. She says something along the lines of, there's this wonderful, wonderful line where she talks about how women, under the chthonic cloud, under her own kind of her control, her acceptance of the chthonic cloud, she uses to manipulate women. Using her umbilical cord, she uses it as a leash to leash all the men around her.
Oh
Which is
yes, yeah.
that
The
was also
umbilical cord by which she leashes every man. Yeah.
yes, floating. Oh yeah, here it is, floating on the snaky umbilical cord by which she leashes every man, which the leashing of every man through the umbilical cord is civilization. It is society. It is the trad society, right? That's the longhouse. That's basically what the longhouse is.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, this is why it's funny to me that she and we'll keep bumping into this theme as we keep going through these passages and these ideas, but it's funny to me that she's seen by certain people as demeaning or misogynistic to women because you get such a pathetic view of men from reading this chapter in a sense where like she explains that men are like pathologically broken, like
Right.
that we're like always missing some core of ourselves, like as the testosterone washes over the fetus and changes its gender from female to male, it pushes it away from the source of life, and then we wander the earth. She writes, in this anguished motion, constantly seeking, sexual satisfaction, money, a good job, buying a boat, reputation, putting out podcasts. Like we're always doing these things to try to fill this like void in us, this need to become something. And it's like really kind of a sad and pathetic life. Whereas she explains a woman is a complete being. A woman is like, in a way, has a more of a soul than a man. She is herself and she is complete. She only needs to be.
Yeah,
And I
she
think,
only needs to be absolutely.
yeah, and I think the way she articulates that struck a chord with me in a way I didn't even think about consciously prior. Where I do think, at least personally, and I wonder if this is true in other men, that's something I always felt. That like, for example, in a certain context, like let's say a group of friends goes out to a bar at night or whatever. As a man, let's say a single man, right? There's kind of this thing of like, there's something you must do. Like you must have the confidence to go talk to a girl or get someone's number or whatever, get lucky, whatever happens, like you must produce something, you must like go outside of yourself. It's really a burden. Whereas as a woman, you can like sit there and you can enjoy a drink and you can laugh and you don't have to do anything, and you can go home with complete dignity and complete honor. You can have men come up to you and offer themselves, and you can go, no thank you, doesn't pass my shit test, sorry, because you're in this position of being complete. You don't need something, right? Whereas the man always needs something outside of themselves. And maybe that's a simplified view again, but but again, I think that's why it's funny to me that she's seen as a misogynist, because essentially her opinion is that women possess incredible power. Women possess power over men in a way that we can never escape. And men are like pathetically running around constantly trying to impress them. Like she brings up the example of the birds, where you have the woman bird is like chilling, and like enjoying the fresh air and eating seeds or whatever birds do. And the male bird must come up and like show its colors and do a silly dance and like jump around and be exasperated. Like it has to make a fool out of itself. It's a graceless existence.
Right. It's constant performance. Like she says this,
Yeah.
that the fear for a woman is the man wandering away, the man as a sailor, man as a cowboy, man as a bum. But for a man, the horror is for the woman to always stay, to never leave.
Hmm.
Yeah, because a woman, if she's not around you, women will always haunt us. The idea of women or being around a woman, the devouring mother, or the oppressiveness of women will always oppress us in a certain way. And that's why she says that the Abrahamic religions are the concept of God, the Judaic God, is a declaration of independence from women, right? Because the concept of the Judaic God is completely abstracted from the earth. He is made by logos. He is made by a word cell. The first priest was a guy who was 5'6" and was denied, basically, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. He's not a peacock. He was a pigeon, right? And
Hmm. Hmm.
the peacock chads always get the Stacy sparrows, right? Well, the incel pigeon has to create God, right? And this idea of of women being centered. The reason why feminists don't like her, is, for me, it's quite obvious, is because women are still subordinate to nature. She talks about this with pregnancy,
Yeah.
right? For when you are pregnant, the cycles of women, they're not conscious. For some reason, femaleness, for any individual woman, femaleness is much more older than you are. And what I mean by that is, every time you have your first what's it called, the little bleeding thing, period. I know women, trust me, I know women, period. Right.
The little bleeding, Gabe. Sometimes I do wonder if you've ever met a woman before.
No, I've seen women on their period cramps. Like, you're just like, I remember was one woman I saw, like, she would have very bad period cramps. Like, she would literally put a pillow between her legs and literally roll around the floor from the pain. It's a very painful existence. But the thing is, it is the nature as a woman, you get the benefits of being female, which is to be inherently valuable. But it comes with a cost. The cost of, again, the period, right? The idea of filth and uncleanliness of the period. And she actually defends this idea of the unclean period, oddly enough, this very Catholic view of the period as taint or as a cost.
Yeah, do you mind if I read that? That's one of, I think, the greatest paragraphs in the book. How about I just read that whole paragraph? Right.
Pop off.
Yeah. Yeah, this is something also, again, like, like as a man, this is something that was so strange to read, because for whatever reason, I feel you don't actually get a lot of whatever. I'm just going to read it. But this was very interesting for me to read it. As a man, this is something I have zero ability to relate to, but the way she portrays this is fascinating. She says, every month for woman is a new defeat of the will. Menstruation was once called the curse, a reference to the expulsion from the garden, when woman was condemned to labor pains because of Eve's sin. Most early cultures hemmed in menstruating women by ritual taboos. Orthodox Jewish women still purify themselves from menstrual uncleanness in the mikveh, a ritual bath. Women have borne the symbolic burden of man's imperfections, his grounding in nature. Menstrual blood is the stain, the birthmark of original sin, the filth that transcendental religion must wash from man. Is this identification merely phobic, merely misogynistic? Or is it possible that there is something uncanny about menstrual blood, justifying its attachment to taboo? I will argue this is not the menstrual blood per se which disturbs the imagination, unstaunchable as that red flood may be, but rather the albumin in the blood, the uterine sheds, placental jellyfish of the female sea. This is the Chthonian matrix from which we rose. We have an evolutionary revulsion from slime, our site of biologic origins. Every month, it is woman's fate to face the abyss of time and being, the abyss which is herself.
Beautiful. That is just absolutely amazing. I like the jellyfish line. That's a great line.
Dude, placental jellyfish of the female sea. Like, just the way, just saying that line, it's like honey. It just flows off the tongue. It's unbelievable.
And you can tell the midwits, like, what does this actually mean? This is actually not really referring to the uterine cycle of a woman's, like shut the fuck up, nerd. That's it. Like, this is so gorgeous, and you get it. The thing is, us as men, she is doing her best, because she has this idea. There's this idea in Carl Jung, who she references from time to time, the idea of individuation, the bonding of both a man's shadow, which is like our unconscious, our negative side, our more alpha gigachat side, and every man has an animus and every woman has an anima, a male counterpart spirit and a female spirit. She is so in tune with her male spirit.
Oh yeah.
She manages to. She's like, there. That sentence, dare I say, another controversial for all the audience, is almost like a female Lovecraft. It's the way Lovecraft would destroy sex. So
yes, yeah.
You know what I mean? The horror of the genuine unknown, the creepiness of womanness, like that description of the sea of women. It's just absolutely vast, bigger than you. You will never know the depths of the ocean. You will never know the depths of yourself as a woman. And the thing is, it is a contract you are born with that you cannot rescind upon.
Yeah, and it's like, again, you realize, the kind of smallness of the male perspective, right? Where it's like she's saying every month, woman must stare into this abyss. Like, she must become acclimated to the idea that we come from this, spiritual pool, this like spiritual soup of Chthonian atoms and molecules and evolutionary biology. And whereas man, we get to kind of pretend that exists. Like we see women when they're like done up and they have makeup on and they have, like we're not seeing like the realities, right? So the few times we do come into contact, right, with the placental jellyfish of the female sea, as she says, it is like uncanny to us. It's like deeply subconsciously upsetting. It kind of reminds us of the reality of who we are in our existence, and the fact that we will decay and we'll go back into the soup and we'll become saggy, and eventually decompose. And it's just such a beautiful way to illustrate the difference in maturity, that men and women maybe develop.
Yeah. And Mother Nature gets her revenge both in birth and in death.
Mm.
And there's this wonderful line where she talks about of Greek tragedy. That tragedy is the first weapon or first silo against nature. Like, let's see, Western dramatic climax was produced by the agon of male will. Through action to identity, action is the route of escape from nature, but all action circles back to origins, the womb tomb of nature. Oedipus trying to escape his mother runs straight into her arms. Western narrative is a mystery story, a process of detection, but since what is detected is unbearable, every revelation leads to another repression. The more we learn about our nature, especially for a woman, the more she learns about her inner nature, it's more horrifying and the more weight she has upon herself. Because the benefits of womanhood, we all see the giggling e-girl. Like, what is the classic manic pixie dream girl? It is the e-girl, and you can see the e-girls. You and I were in a live event, and we were mostly male dominated, and you see these girls, and this little room. We're drinking, and this womb just float into a room, and whimsical fairy blood memories, the based version of manic pixie dream girls. And you see their beautiful dresses, and they're floating. They're walking. You don't see their feet with a beautiful dress. They look like they're floating in their dresses, and you look at them, and they're just. You think of how do they exist? How are they here? Like in this little very theory cell thing. You look at them, and it's ethereal. They are like fairies. The pixie was a good term, whoever made it up, because they are like pixies. They just appear in nature abruptly, and they just disappear like fireflies.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I would say that is the male. That is the way. Yeah, like the way you view them. This kind of romantic, idealized perception. That is like very much our perspective. I think her point is, given our limitations in understanding the female experience, right? If we really could see the placental jellyfish, we would realize something more stained and dark and organic about the entire association.
I love the placental jellyfish.
That's amazing.
Hey,
Yeah.
hey, babe, can I take a whack at your placental jellyfish tonight?
But real quick on the we should stay on the Greek tragedy thing. This is another one of her excellent observations. One of these things that, again, she sort of is teaching you how to think. This is, again, like if you're kind of mid-range intelligence, like you're listening to this and you're like evaluating whether everything's true, get out of that. Like the point of this is to see how a brilliant mind might draw literary and artistic conclusions, based on contrasts and events throughout history. So one of these that I think is just shockingly brilliant is when she talks about Greek tragedy and essentially says that our perception of the Greeks, of these plays, of these tragedies, because we look back on them from a sort of neoclassical Victorian period, we project like a seriousness onto them. We think that these people were like serious philosophers. She says the Greeks were in fact very silly, that these plays were full of jokes and like comic elements that we don't always understand, millennia later. And that in fact, the actual structure of the plot, the actual structure of the tragic plot, right, mirrors the male sexual experience. So she says here, tragedy is a male paradigm of rise and fall, a graph in which dramatic and sexual climax are in shadowy analogy, right? So it's funny. This is like very similar to conversations we've had about plot, in novels and stuff. She's essentially arguing here that the tragedy, which is based on a character being introduced, they have a flaw, they go about their life, they have some, inciting event, the plot builds and builds and builds and then reaches a climax, after which there is a sort of rapid fall, a deflation into a flaccid kind of ending that ties everything up. She's saying basically that this plot structure, which you see in essentially every movie you've ever watched, is a shadowy analogy of the male sexual experience. Right? Just a brilliant thought, just such an interesting thing to think about, that our it's always drawing these parallels between our biology, what we are, and our projections, the things we create, and like helping us realize that much of our biology would have influenced the way we create these things, right?
Yes, and the idea of a climax, of something ending, you
Mm-hmm.
know, she says evolutionary or apocalyptic history is a male wish list with a happy ending, a
Mm.
phallic peak. Because for a woman is intrinsically cyclical. The roundness of the belly magic, right? The roundness of the breast, the roundness of the stomach. It is internal. Woman is constantly internal. She is always in the beautiful divine default, like divine default. While we're always kind of like picking at some kind of peak. And that tragedy is a male game. She says something along those lines, that tragedy is a male game. And when women are introduced into tragedies, like she says Lady Macbeth, Phaedra, Medea, she says something along the lines of tragic woman is less moral than man. Her will to power is naked. Her actions are under a chthonic cloud. They are a conduit of the irrational, opening the genre to intrusions of the barbaric force that drama shuts out at its birth. Tragedy is a Western vehicle for testing and purification of the male will. The difficulty in grafting female protagonist onto a result not of male prejudice, but of instinctive sexual strategies. Woman introduces untransformed cruelty into tragedy because she is the problem that the genre is trying to correct.
Mm.
Right? Because tragedy is this stepping away from manhood. It is the testing of men are trying to see how they are as themselves. They're trying to create standards upon themselves, standards of their own capacity of cruelty, their own flaws away from women. When women are introduced into tragedy, it was a sense of judgment and pain. She is under her own chthonic cloud. Her own a woman's will to power in any tragedy is apparent.
Mm.
You see this in every tragedy, in every the film noir, the femme fatale, right? A depressed man sees a beautiful girl walking to her ex girlfriend, whatever, walks to him. He knows that fundamentally he is no longer alone, whether he wishes to or not. At the end of the day, one way or the other, at the end of that night, he is going to be judged.
Yeah, absolutely. And I found this analysis, like you just mentioned, of Christianity and Judaism, which I'm well acquainted with, really damning, where she, I think, very accurately explains that the need for these Abrahamic religions would have arisen out of this kind of uncomfortability with the earth worship, the female worship of early paganism, and manifested as, right, the sky worship of Christianity and Judaism, where you worship a male sky figure, the Abrahamic God. And the idea that, yeah, men, we need there to be some kind of apocalypse, or we need there to be some kind of Elysian Fields type afterlife, some kind of heaven, some kind of like return to the Arcadian state. Uh, and that, yeah, who came up with these religions? Men, right? And that, of course, we had to come up with them in these ways, right? Because that's our psychological neuroses. We need there to be this kind of relief. Whereas woman, like you mentioned, is in tune with the cycles, in tune with the world, a whole being, a souled being, in a way. It's kind of an excellent way to argue against Christianity's like truthfulness. Like I have some Christian friends, and um, not that I have thrown this argument at them, but it's interesting whenever you kind of go back and forth on issues of faith or religion, specifically Abrahamic religion. You talk about the veracity of, did Jesus rise after 3 days? You talk about, are these stories mimicked in other faiths? You talk about the scientific, these common kind of new atheist lines of argument, that get put on Christianity. And then Paglia comes along, and in such a genius way, she says, I'm not really interested in all that. I'm interested in the deeper Cthonian psychological reasons why we would have even come up with these faiths, right? Again, just she's doing something literary here. She's doing something that's sort of beyond black and white truth. It's like a work of art. It's making historical analysis and philosophy an artistic and literary endeavor.
Right. She's doing it. She doesn't care for this abstract logocentrism, like this
Yeah.
idea of being a rules lawyer. Like, oh, technicality X, Y, and Z. No, no, no. This is not the point. The fundamental aspect of whether or not you deny or accept Jesus rose on the third day, that is the major thing. You must of any the Nicene Creed, right? Jesus is the Son of God, and He rose up upon the earth. And the reason why you must accept that, the reason why it is intrinsic, is it is something that is beyond belief of of rationality. It is the creator of Earth itself, the creating of nature, creating something that itself cannot create. The reason why you step forward with the biggest ask of any religion is because you have to. The biggest ask is something once you completely and utterly swallow that, everything else is just embodied.
Mm.
You're only thinking with one sentence, basically. You just need to think on one thing. Reason is fundamentally an acid bath. You just need a drop of it if when necessary, and everything else is embodied. And he talked about her idea of the silliness of the Greeks, right?
Hmm.
Nietzsche talked about this, about the divine shallowness of the Greeks, and the same thing Spengler talks about, this the shallowness of the Greeks. If you look at Greek statues, the vast majority of Greek statues are archetypal. They're not of any one individual. And as and Greek Dionysus. Sorry, he's being strangled by Dionysus right now.
Hmm.
All right. But anyway, the Spengler talks about this. If you look at the sculptures of Greece, it's always not of individuals. It's always the archetype of the boxer, the archetype of the thinker, the archetype of the old man. There was a divine shallowness. They were so confident in themselves that it didn't have to. The contemplation comes with a burden, and contemplation is associated with femaleness, with water. Think about Narcissus, this tale of Narcissus, of him staring into his own reflection in the water until he is drowned by the still pond of the feminine waters, right? What women can do all their lives, right? Let's say with the Venus being birthed from the ocean, she can contemplate on the waters of womanhood all herself. But when a man tries to be a narcissist, literally like Narcissus of the tragedy, he is drowned by it. He cannot do what the feminine can do. It kills him. It is his damnation. It is his end. And with the
Mm.
ideas of a religion, if you look at even on the architecture, you look at the temples, right? The Magian cultures, the Arabic, Judaic, they're all rounded, right? If you notice, a temple is mostly round for the most part.
Mm.
It wasn't until the Catholics, the early Christianity of imbuing our own idea of the Apollonian, we had to make it into spikes. We had to give it a point. We had to make it look like an awesome spaceship, basically. It's because it has to be like a gun. If you go into if you go into a a a Catholic cathedral is like an instrument upon itself. The sound design, the reason why we chant in there, it's like a gun, it's like gunpowder going up to the painted skies. It is trying to break free. We still added that pagan element. That's why music is so important in Catholic. That's why the arts. She talks about the reason why arts, about the visual medium, right? Because with the Judaic, the visual was the icons were considered deeply sinful in Judaism,
Mm.
right? And initially the early Christians were also anti-art, but the pagan masses of these new converted faith had to deny that. They had said, no, we must have visual stimuli. We must have the painted word. The logos of God must be represented in art. And that was the great conquest of paganism over Christianity, which resulted in the rich history of Catholic art.
Yeah, which is essentially, I mean, that's essentially her historical thesis with this book. And I think it's unimpeachable. You explained it very well that, yeah, I mean, Catholicism is a rebirth of pagan ideals, imagery, mother worship through Christianity, right? Jews are obsessed with words, they're obsessed with language. Didn't quite stick on the Italian, Greek, European pagan cultures. They had to adopt these saints, these images, these like sinewy bodies and paintings and sculptures. And the obsession with Mary among Catholics in particular, again, I'm kind of just echoing her ideas here, whether they're true or not. Again, don't, just let them kind of wash over you. Think about them, right? The obsession with Mary is very much like this need to worship a woman. Like there's something about these Italian Mediterranean cultures, where worshiping dad, yeah, it just there's something missing there. We need to worship a woman in some way, a mother. But she reveals, right, they can only worship a clean mother, a virgin mother, right, a perfect washed, detergented, totally bacterialist mother.
Right.
Whereas the pagan mother, the original one, no, the original pagan mother was filth, dirt,
Blood.
blood, right? Bark, flowers, it's like it's everything organic that must like mix. It's molecules. It's like everything but this kind of like clean, pretty, depiction of Mary.
Yeah, and also you see this. She also talks about this scene a little bit later, in the birth of the Western. I think something. She talks about the Egyptian creation myth of the
Mm.
creating God. He jerked himself off and he ate his own seed, and
Yeah, yeah.
Ouroboros, the snake, right? And we associate the snake with Mother Mary stepping upon the snake. It is
Mm.
it is both in a beautiful little inversion. The creation of Mary, or the worship of Mary, is a pagan-esque necessity. It's a pagan impulse, but we must have that pagan impulse stepping on its own pagan roots, which is of course a snake. That's why every Catholic church has a statue of Mary stepping upon the snake, smashing the snake
Right,
upon its
right,
root.
right. Yeah, I think it's worth also, we're kind of orbiting around her general um, excavations of Christianity, that she also makes this interesting point. I have it here. She says, to live in love and peace is one of the outstanding contradictions that Christianity has imposed on its followers, an ideal impossible and unnatural. And her central point here that I feel very strongly is that essentially love and hate are really sort of different veneers of a similar kind of emotion, right? You either have passion towards something either gets a rise out of you or it doesn't. And the real contrast in human existence, in your sensory experience, understanding of different things and people and art, is between, right, passion and indifference. It's not love and hate. Does it get a rise out of you? Does it make you feel something? Does it make your blood boil? Does it make your heart, kind of swoon? And that these two things are really linked. The person you fall in love with is also the person you kind of want to strangle, right? Because these things are so intricate, because the intensity of the emotion is so connected. And she says this Christian idea of universal love. She's like, what does that mean? How can you universally love something, right? Like it's this kind of liberal idea too of like just stop hatred, right? Like what does that mean? If you don't hate, you don't love, right? To hate something is to love something. If you hate, racism, then no, that means you love like equality, right? Like these two things are always connected. You can only hate and love. You can't just have this kind of blanket attitude of universal love that's meaningless. She kind of, I think, artfully explains why that's just not a very dynamic belief system. And then hits you with the hammer of that's why they had to invent Satan. That's why Satan had to come along. There had to be some kind of nexus for hatred to balance everything out, because this kind of blanket idea of universal love, it just didn't titillate people. It didn't map onto the way they act and think and feel psychologically.
Yeah, under the idea of Catholicism, Catholics have a belief that hatred is actually righteous. That
Right.
is actually, it is morally good and justified to have hatred of evil. Is as a requirement, the true love of the pure and the beautiful and the just.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's also she describes herself multiple times in some of her essays as like she wants to be a Catholic pagan.
Right.
The female Julius Evola, right? But you can understand this. I mean, she did multiple photo shoots, where she loves to pretend to be a mugger. Have you seen those like black and white pictures of her like in a giant jacket in an alleyway with a switchblade,
Oh yeah, yeah, great.
or her with like a horse boots and a sword? Like
Yeah,
she
dude,
looks.
she's so funny, and she's so like she's just so alive. Again, like you can't really, I don't know how someone could really watch this woman, watch interviews, see these pictures we're talking about, and not just feel like, wow, that's the kind of person I want to be. I want to be like someone who's bursting at the seams with love and appreciation for the world. And I'm constantly like acting as this character, in these kind of beautiful, expansive, proud ways. Like and if I was a woman, like Paglia, if I have a daughter, if I have daughters, Paglia is the kind of person I would want to sort of expose them to, at the right age, where it's like, you know do whatever you want in life, but like if you do want to be like ambitious and powerful and proclamatory, like this is the way you can do that. You can do it unapologetically.
And you're right that she's bursting at the seams of pride and pride and love of life, and she wants more. She wants everything. She wants something. She invests in the idea of beauty, and that's why she's like fundamentally in a lot of ways. I mean, this is where the idea of her influence on BAP comes from,
Mm.
right? Susan Sontag. I mean, I was actually looking for all the sneak disses when I was researching this. Susan Sontag called her. She's trying to be a Nazi about the anti-Semitism, her worship of beauty, right? Which says a lot, right? Which says a lot. In the modern feminist conceptualization, worship, fascism is inherently the worship of beauty. The beauty is a fascist state because the idea of going something further. It's an Apollonian. We view Paglia as mostly Dionysian, but her rigid, her wanting, her craving, her lusting, her reaching out for the beautiful is absolutely Apollonian. She is
Mm.
projecting like laser beams. She wants to reach. She believes in decadence. By the way, when you watch some interviews with her, I believe in decadence. And I do think that homosexuality and all these things. I believe in the supremacy of art, but I do not deny that society has cycles and it's an organic thing, and decadence does lead to ruin, which I found extremely shocking. She says the Nietzschean yes. She steps over this. Like, yes, I am a pagan. Yes, I understand that she says online, she quotes someone else, with art, when art steps into a society, it comes with its sisters blasphemy and pornography.
Mhm.
It is always shadowed by those two. And as in all of, in history of Catholicism, it introduces art, and the entire Catholic struggle is with the idea of blasphemy and the idea of pornography, of sexuality. It is
Mhm.
that dance, is that tension. And even in the holy city of Rome, there were brothels. At the peak of Catholic power, and there was a stalemate. There was a neutral understanding on both terms on that.
Yeah, and she accurately, if you wanna, there's a great, if you buy the audiobook to Men and Women, and what's the book called again? Men and Women, Sex, Gender, Feminism, the essay
Sex and freedom.
collection. Yeah. Anyway, that essay collection, there's an audiobook, and the first portion of that book is this first chapter, and you can listen to her kind of give a guided reading. It's great to hear this in her own words. And she pauses a little bit after a certain line, where she discusses this kind of principle, and where she talks about the concept of, if you have kind of a too on the nose sex positive culture, if sex positivity reaches a kind of cultural pervasiveness that's like unchallenged, the next thing will be outbreaks of sadism between people, sadism. Um, and she pauses and she says, like, I was totally right. She gives this kind of off the script little aside where she's like, look at college campuses today, look at like kink culture and all these things. She's like, because sex positivity basically won, it necessarily turned into this kind of decadent perversion of, what was like a more pure and kind of restrained but more interesting sexual dynamic that existed prior. And I do find her views on sex and pornography and all this stuff uh, not contradictory, but I do think there's a little bit of a dissonance with how, especially when you look at how she talks about these things over the years, like she herself is so sex positive in a way. Like she says she's pro pornography, she's pro like um uh she's essentially pro gay and pro like sexual expression and pro nudity and like a lot of these things with the few necessary qualifications of, like, it shouldn't be in public, it shouldn't be seen by children, things like that. But then she makes these points about, like, but if it goes too far, if the culture seeps too much toward this, you get an excess of androgyny and kind of fluidity that causes a sort of worship of weakness and a lack of boundary and strength within the culture and these outbreaks of sadism. So I don't know. I do think in a way she tries to have it both ways. I think maybe it's the kind of thing where her disposition personally is to be sort of liberated and libertarian, but I think she's aware more and more, and I think especially as the years have gone on, that there's a real cost to all of this, and that something's been lost, and that there's potentially like kind of gross and dark consequences, to much of that.
Well, she wants a healthy, the classic society of, Plato's men of gold, they can do it, but the plebs cannot. It's the 2080 rule. The elites of society, they can have spectacle, they can have novelty, but it has to be restrained within a very tight vanguard. It's a difference between a lean wolf and a fat pug, right? Because this hypersexuality we experience today is mostly sterilized. We've exposed to ourselves to the high point of sexuality was in her age, the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It's like having a dog on a leash for so long and you finally let it go and it's a burst of energy. But if you had the dog off its leash for so long, it just kind of lays there. It has no wanting of running. It has no need for running. And only in the dogs that do have energy, you see this in you know the idea of safe horny. Are you familiar with that term?
I am not.
Safe horny. There's this new idea of like very politically safe ways of describing sex. The Netflix sex scenes of sex, where it's
the like wearing a sports bra while while the
Yeah.
sex, that type of thing,
right, or and there's no sense of danger, and there's no sense of like anything. It's very shallow. There's no sense of anything beneath it. Like there's this one video on Twitter that everyone got ranting about. It was this male cartoonist, and he drew himself and all these women of different video game characters, all of variety of shapes, and he's singing this song. He's like, I just really like girls, tall girls, long girls, thick girls, skinny girls, and it's this grown man, and he's describing sex almost like a puppy wanting to be belly rubbed.
Gross.
It is the only it is the only safe way in the post pussy hat era, as Dan Bolt, the Nutcracker, would show, is the safe way of, I'm a male, please, 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 if you're okay with it, can you please have sex with me or not? It's okay, right? It's the puppy dogification. This castrated, not even a puppy. A puppy will grow up and have this very feral of wanting to dance, wanting to show. It is a castrated puppy, right? Where it's always this weird simpering wanting of just, mush.
Yeah. It's funny. I also found it very like endearing. If you watch her appearance on Bill Maher in the 90s, she was on Bill Maher's old 90s show, Politically Incorrect.
Yeah.
She opens it by saying, like, I love men and women, right? Like she's this kind of basically transgender being. She's like, I haven't been able to get a date in 10 years.
Right.
she herself is like, she's so like self-effacing, like, like no one will go out with me. I'm too annoying.
She hangs out. She prefers gay men to anyone else.
Yeah.
It's like the classic, lesbians can only get along with gay men, and she talks about this because she says, men are the ultimate form of masculinity in a sense, because it's the ultimate cutting off. It's the ultimate saying of no to femininity, right?
You mean gay men? Yeah.
Yeah, gay men. Yeah. It's the ultimate saying no. And of course, she even says in this book, which raised my eyebrow, she's like, that's why nature cursed them with STDs.
Right, which got her in a lot of trouble. And dude, I mean, what a perfect illustration of our kind of point about like midwit versus larger interpretations of Paglia's work, where no, she's not saying that it's like a good thing. She's not saying, awesome, I'm so glad that they were cursed by, outbreaks of HIV in the 90s. She's making a literary interpretation. She's saying, look at how, everyone knows that gay men engage in more liberal sexual practices than straight men or straight women. And she's making a literary kind of allusion that they fly too close to the sun in a way, and that there was, of course, some kind of consequence to that. It's the kind of thing like, you must be able to see that and understand it in a literary way, not as something that she's like, maniacally tapping her fingers saying like, yes, finally they are suffering. Obviously not.
Yeah, I mean, and she struggles with this. She struggles with this because she believes, and again, in the Spenglerian idea of decadence of society as an organism, and has a respect for civilization and men. I mean, she has that one great line. She thinks that male construction, when she's working on a bridge, she says, construction is the male version of poetry, right? It's a male's poetry.
Beautiful, yeah.
It's a great line. It's a great line.
That's what I mean. Like something like that. Yeah. She describes like that when she's walking down the street and she sees construction workers on like a crane and like that type of thing. She stops and, just like you said, she views it as poetry, and she appreciates the beauty of the connection that it has spiritually, going back to ancient Egypt. How men get together and they construct these massive buildings and objects, and that's what I mean. It's like, that type of thing is infectious. That type of thing makes you leave your house the next day and kind of view the world with a renewed sense of appreciation and dynamic understanding. In that way, I really do feel like she is sort of a modern religious figure. Like to read Paglia and to download her consciousness as much as you can is like to see the world through new and fresh eyes.
Absolutely, yes, and a deeply organic, fresh set of eyes because it is
Mm.
a cleanser. And you feel when you finish reading Pongula, you feel cleansed. You feel like you took like like a both a very hot bath and a very exciting last 10 minutes of a freezing water, where you
Yeah,
feel pumped afterwards. Right?
well said. Yeah.
You soak, but then once you finish, like you find a very good one liner to really end on. It is literally like that final 10 minutes. Like you know what, fuck it, I'm going to take an ice shower, and then you just
Yeah,
burst
yeah.
out the
There's
shower.
adrenaline. There's adrenaline. Yeah, and I think she does it in such a lovely way, downloading her kind of consciousness into your mind. And it dovetails with another point I'd like us to discuss, which is her view on what art is essentially, which is, I think, very different than how most people view art. You know, I think most people, most writers, especially, because most writers are a certain type of person. Most writers are like thoughtful and sensitive and like, oh, this is, I want to show you like, you know, my like thoughts and my little observations and my little poetic like blah blah blah. And she's like, no, like that's fine if that's what you want to do, but she's very clear that art is essentially a very aggressive act that is for the salvation of the artist in particular. That they, here's the quote, she says, um, the artist makes art not to save humankind, but to save himself. Every benevolent remark by an artist is a fog to cover his tracks, the bloody trail of his assault against reality and others. And essentially, her point is that when you, as an artist, like make a piece of art, you make a painting, you write a book, you are forcing, you are like in a very imperial way, in a very violent way, you are forcing your perspective, your sensibility, your views into someone's mind. That's a very aggressive fascist thing. And artists have this attitude of yeah, like they're just like they're putting out their little like benevolent works, or they get interviewed and they act like what they're doing is socially conscious in some way. And it's like, no, let's be honest about what art is. It's forceful influence, right? It's like you're imposing yourself and your ideas and your sensibility and your aesthetic tastes literally into someone, into their mind. You know, I love how honest she is about that, right? Especially in the context of her own work, which does exactly that.
Yeah, art as an assault, and it, I really like the way you said that. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, she does view art and fascism or authoritarianism intertwined. She talks about the origins of art with the Egyptian god state, the pharaoh. Right at the end of the day, the ultimate flex of a pharaoh, of a god
Mm,
king, of a god emperor, is to create himself. Is to not only enact his own order of creation. Creation is the spitting upon. It is an assault on nature. That's what she says. Our art is an assault on nature. It's
mm,
an assault on the senses. And it's very funny because that actually is almost a direct quote by. I was just getting into the history of the Italian art style Futurism. It's the founder of it was a guy named Tomasi, and
mm,
it was the early 1900s. Italy. There's a pre-fascism. A Futurism is a prefix to fascism, and it was there's these street gangs of people wearing black leather jackets in an Italian. Literally says, "I don't give a fuck." Right? Which is and that was the energy. And this guy, he was right wing in his personality, but he's like, fuck the past. I do not care about the past. Museums, there's no difference between a museum and a cemetery.
mm,
There's lying there. Art, it needs to be an assault. It needs to be speed. It needs to speed is glorious. It is a you must be pushing for it. It is an expulsion of energy. Right? It is energy, the expulsion of kinetic energy as a worship of life, right? Not the still life, not the 18th century realism. Like, no, the point of art is to convey a sense of energy. And she says this as well in her view of art, which I find very fascinating. And she even says the origin of art is with the fascist god emperor state of Egypt, right? You see this with the dilution of art, when it's a kind of this weird scene queen, this weird oligarchy of today's sterile art culture. I mean, a good example of this, you know that film A24 came out, the Civil War movie.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, there's this very easy tweet some guy made. He's like, "Wow, you don't really see a lot of films with women in their 40s starring it." And the reason why is that because the film is as barren as the womb between her legs. It is hollow. It is empty. Even leftist art, where the little Trump stand and gets shot by a black woman, is sterile. You compare this to like Battleship Potemkin or like Now Come and See, like the glorious Soviet Union. You see classic Soviet cinema, the great leftist art, where it was a revolution, where it had fangs. It was about the masses as lava, right? It was an explosion. It was force, right? But you see the sterile and decayed and blasé art of leftism it's bitchy. It's finger wagging. It's not a clenched fist with a fist up the air with force and energy. It's completely kind of like annoying. It's like mosquitoes. And you see this at the end of the day. All great art must have a sense of force behind it, which is she accepts it entirely. She concedes to it entirely. And I can see her being like, this is a moment of woke being more correct than the mainstream. Because if she was her personality, if you sent her to 1920s like Italy, and she saw Giga Chad Mussolini like marching on Rome, she would totally be into it. She would totally be like with Salvador Dali, and like she would love it. It is the personification.
Well, she would love it in the sense that it's not that she she would or she would not. I don't know how much she would literally ascribe to every political point, but she would love the bursting male authority of it. She would love the spectacle of it. She would love the energy of it, right? The overflow of Apollonian authority, right? That's what I mean is she has this ability, and it's a type of brilliance, to appreciate everything in the world on these lines of Apollonian and Dionysian contrast, right? To like appreciate everything for what it is and for what it represents and for its integration on this grand historical narrative.
Right, and that's what she worships, and that's why when looking, you can see this kind of her modern day, because she after the early 2000s, she kind of evaporated like a ghost. The volcano explodes, right, with sexual persona, her interviews, and then you just see the smoke clouds and a little bit of vapors, and the ashes kind of meld into you, right, as it did with us, as it does also with Dime Square. Obviously, she's the grandmother. She is the Athena to Dime Square what Athena was to Athens.
Completely. Yeah, completely.
This idea of female rebelliousness, and that's the problem. Like I was looking at her Wikipedia page, like she doesn't like she remembers the 1960s the way you remember that scene in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, that classic scene where he talks about like the rising wave of like the
Actually,
60s.
I've never seen it.
You've never seen Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas?
That's a gap in my film knowledge. Yeah.
Wow, you got to take the Terry Gilliam pill, man. But
Right there, I gotta see it.
yeah, but when she talks about the 60s, is she explains it like the way some Italian futurists explained the early years of fascism, which was it was an explosion. It was an explosion of revelation. It was a panopticon of just energy and lust and in your face sexuality. She says, she says this with date rape culture, right? Because there was this very ironic scene with her in the Charlie Rose show. She's like, "Listen, the date rape discussion is over. I killed it. It is a begone issue." Of course, womp womp, on that topic. But she is never wrong. She is never truly wrong. She's always right in a sense. She would never she refuses to think herself as wrong. She is always platonically right in her own mind. And when she discusses the way the 1960s were, it was about an explosion of life and vitality. And that, and she sees, and you see this idea of leftism in her view was about, that's why she described herself as a libertarian. And when Charlie Rose says, well, you being complaining about political correctness, it awfully sounds like neoconservatives. And, she jumps back. She's go, no. Like, I'm a libertarian. Right. But then you kind of see the sad thing with her modern life. Like she briefly endorsed Kamala Harris, then stepped down in 2020, apparently. And like she feels abstractly lost, I feel, in the modern Apollonian. Is that she can't have the Nietzschean yes The way like the Dime Square girls goes like, yeah, fuck it, I like Trump. I'll wear the Trump hat. It's giving Mussolini energy, right?
Mhm.
She can't have that ultimate stepping above the way her granddaughters can, if you will.
Yeah, well, I don't know that that's really her view. I mean, I think she is. I mean, she's talked like she's a Democrat. In the past, she essentially supports like most liberal policies. But again, she's brilliant. She can appreciate like she got Trump right away. Like even though she's kind of a liberal in some ways, she understood Trump immediately and said like, yeah, this guy's going to get mass appeal because he taps into a certain kind of energy and a need for a kind of middle finger to the upper classes and the elites that is um, being felt by middle America. Like she has a knack for understanding and appreciating bursts of energy and meaning, in ways that other people really struggle with.
Yeah, and Trump is the only blonde she likes. Uh,
But real quick on the '60s thing, also, I think her views on the '60s are so interesting because I think a lot of my personal like artistic the first things I saw that I was like, wow, that's really cool, was like the Beatles and classic rock and the '60s and um, Beatles music videos and classic rock cover albums and Led Zeppelin and all that stuff was like when I was very young, kind of my first exposure to adult art. And the part of the '60s that she talks about a lot that she says was lost was this greater global consciousness that she says was supposed to emerge, which was supposed to integrate all of the world's religions in this almost perennialist way, right? The way that you have, like, almost a theosophist way as well, where we would integrate all of the different truths and we would reach some greater global consciousness after we'd integrated them all. And the way the '60s are seen now is just activism and drugs. It's just like there was social friction and protest and activism, and there was a lot of drugs and rock and roll. And what she explains is that there was this other third side, this spiritual side to it that we don't talk about as much. And I love her proposal for essentially what education should be, where she says that what we should be doing with the world's youth is basically giving them a curriculum of comparative religion, where when they're young, what they study is these are typical stories and faiths and portrayals of God and creation and saints, and that really should be education for young people. And she says that as an atheist, right? How many atheists, basically, she describes herself as an atheist, even though she says she has a mystical view of the universe. How many of them recognize the importance of religion and would support this kind of perennial universalist religious education in public schools?
Well, not I mean, not only that, she says in universities it should be foregrounded in like with
Mm,
mathematics, right? Because the Greeks obviously worship mathematics as divine, as in the Platonic sense. She says, we must have a foregrounding of the realities around us, as our ancestor did. The idea of having you must learn to understand and be yet again the weight, the heaviness. You must bear the weight of what has come before you in order if you want to actually rise up with your full chest. The idea, Isaac Newton said this idea of, the reason why I was able to see so far is because I stood on the shoulders of giants.
mm,
Well, in reality, the greatest men have the weight of giants upon their shoulders. And you, as a great man, must bear that weight, carry it, and lift it higher than the previous generation before you. That is what an education is. The education is a lust and a struggle. Like she wants to bring up the idea of education as a struggle, a divine struggle, a pleasure struggle for the very best and brightest.
mm, mm. Yeah, absolutely. You know what else is kind of interesting is her view of capitalism. I find really interesting. Where again, it's kind of like the construction site, kind of detouring here, but um, the way she describes capitalism is let me. She says here, the capitalist distribution network, a complex chain of factory, transport, warehouse, and retail outlet, is one of the greatest male accomplishments in the history of culture. It is a lightning quick Apollonian circuit of male bonding, which is such an interesting way of describing it. Where yeah, like this you know, if you really appreciate the intricateness of the global supply chain, you know, even if you're a protectionist or you don't support globalization, like just the accomplishment that it is to create this massive web of goods and resources and financial transactions and shipping schedules across boats and trains and cars and trucks and roads and deadlines and sell by dates and stores, and like it's such a beautiful thing. She describes it as this almost like um, natural thing that has emerged. You know, this vast circuit of male bonding. You know, it's again, whether you're like a capitalist or not, she can see the beauty in something like that, like the awe in something like that.
Not only that, like it's the idea, it's the autistic kid with the train shed's ultimate dream.
You're right.
It's the
Yeah.
global network of capitalism.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and she's very grateful for capitalism. She's like, look at all
Hmm.
it's done. It's the ultimate expression of like, Apollonian intellect,
Hmm.
right? And I mean, it's from her point of view, of course, it is anti-human in the sense of capitalism. Capitalism is the true AI of artificial intelligence, right? It is so distant from nature because it melts anything natural down. It
Mm.
melts down borders. It melts down social conditions. It melts down families. It is an acid bath in a sense. In a the at its best when it's controlled by this extremely highfalutin, high IQ, high surfing the wave. But at the end of the day, you always drown in that wave.
Mm.
It's the same thing with men always falling. It's the climax and fall. The men will always sink into the waters that they try to perceive in.
Mhm. Yeah, one of the I mean, essentially I think she kind of does this with Provocations, her 2019 work, but the lore around Sexual Persona is that there was a whole second volume,
Yes.
that was going to be, pick up at the end of Emily Dickinson and take us into the 20th and 21st century with Hollywood and the glamour of Hollywood going into kind of modern Hollywood and sports and rock and roll and pop culture. And man, it's disappointing that we don't get to read that. I think a lot of her ideas in those areas were eventually released in different forms, essays, interviews, things like that. But I would have loved to see Sexual Persona too. I would have loved to have seen that kind of New Testament version.
Yes. Yeah, again, also, that would have been very Spenglerian because he released Decline of the West in 2 volumes. And
Yeah.
she even mentions it like your middle, like in page 5. She's like, "Oh, I'll expand it more." She has this long rant about Hollywood, and she's like, "Oh,
Right.
I'll explain this more in volume 2 on my work on Hollywood," and it never
Right.
appears. I guess it was too daunting of an ask for her.
Yeah, I wonder. I don't know exactly why. It's interesting you look at her career after. I mean, she becomes a superstar in the 90s, and she's doing a lot of talk shows and a lot of public events, and she's still a professor, but you can tell she's really like a celebrity for a while in the 90s, and reaches like a level of fame that's somewhat similar to like Christopher Hitchens, like at his peak, where she's not, being recognized on the street necessarily that much, but if you're kind of in any kind of intellectual area of interest, you probably have an awareness of her. And then she retreats for a while, like you mentioned in the 2000s. There's a reemergence where she pops up around the post-Trump period in like 2017, 2018. There's the famous Jordan Peterson interview. She does a couple like book tour type things where she's answering questions, and then she deals with a pretty serious like uh, coup where these dumbass students at University of Philadelphia try to get her fired, in like 2019, 2020. And that sort of, I don't want to say silences her because I don't think that's what happened, but she retreats somewhat after that, where I think she sort of, I honestly think when she thinks about the direction of the world, I mean, because I do think, like you mentioned earlier, she felt like she sort of won a lot of these battles, and I can't imagine that she's not disappointed that many of them have been unwon, in the last 10 or so years, and she's retreated. And by all accounts, now she's spending much of her time working on this new Native American opus, where she's going to go into the psychological depths of Native American mythology that should be incredible, but is less interested in being a public figure and in giving her opinion on politics, which in a sense I think is actually good. I don't necessarily think I'm glad she didn't go the route like a Peterson of essentially becoming a modern pundit, a modern political pundit, because I do feel that what she does is more spiritual, more broad, more religious in a sense. And there's something a little bit tacky and provincial and current about making your identity too much about like the political whims of the current day, where I really feel like, yeah, what she's doing is on a greater level. She should be remembered like someone like Nietzsche, where the work lasts long after the death of the figure, where the work can be continually re-examined in newer and broader cultural contexts. And I'm kind of glad she didn't become too much of a talking head,
Well, I think it's just an acceptance that the wave, as she tried to be realizing the currents of culture. She tried to be in the currents of culture. She loved pop culture. She defended pop culture,
Right.
even in Glittering Images, her very famous defense of Star Wars prequels,
Yeah.
right? But I think she finally realized, like, the future I wanted, the culture I had is gone. And
Mhm.
there's this idea, I was recently reading the letters of F. Scott Fitzgerald, the Great Gatsby guy. And in the late 1930s, he's looking for his books in a bookstore, and they're all out of print. And he asks, what the hell? He asks his old publisher, Maxwell Perkins. He's like, "What the hell does out of print mean?" And at the end of the day, he just realizes that this culture of the 1920s, the Jazz Age, Lenin. There's this great quote from Lenin of all people, who says, there are decades when nothing happens, and there is weeks when decades happen.
Hmm.
And there's this idea of a scene, like, we have this weird with music. Each generation has their own decade of culture and of music and identity. The flower childs of the 60s, the rock and rollers of the 70s, and the hair rock of the 80s, right?
Mhm.
Of course, the flower children were on like one strip of land in like San Francisco, California. I'm pretty sure there weren't any flower children in Bumfuck, Ohio, right? um but this idea, I think there's a kind of acceptance that the future she wanted, the culture she wanted to live in, evaporated around her. And
Hmm.
she I think it's just an acceptance in a lot of ways. Because what is there for her to do at this point? And the same thing with like Peterson. Peterson's constantly, listen, I respect Peterson. Peterson, you used to kind of, used to mean something to me back when in my younger years. But he's that he is that one grandpa you cannot let have a Facebook account. I'm sorry, he
Yeah.
is a boomer, and like Facebook hot takes are boomers crack. I'm sorry, it really is.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, it takes you out of you should be creating eternal things, like like sexual persona is an eternal work. It's an eternal piece of art and like literary interpretation of history. And yeah, when you're too much of the moment, when you're too much of the zeitgeist and the current day and the Peterson talking about like a fucking Sports Illustrated issue, swimsuit magazine type shit. Yeah, it's tacky. It's like it degrades your status and your aura as being, someone who has a broader understanding of reality.
It should be
Like
beneath
Paglia.
you. It
It
should
should
be
be.
beneath.
Yeah, it's
And then,
fluff.
yeah, I mean, and also, I mean, well, when Paglia went, did you see that one where she was on the Food Network?
Yeah, hilarious. Yeah.
That was so good. That was great. She said, like, yes, it's like I understand rapists. When I was researching Camille, I was obsessive. I can understand stalkers. I have very much that stalker energy inside me.
Oh my god, yeah. I bought so I have a Playboy magazine that I bought on eBay. It's so funny. I actually bought a Playboy magazine for the articles because I bought a Playboy magazine from the 90s that has an interview with her. It
Yeah.
was this big, interview with Camille Paglia, this like 19 whatever Playboy magazine. And it's so funny in there. She says that she's like mentions how she saw Elizabeth Taylor, I think. Maybe I'm getting the actress wrong, but some actress that she idolized, and how she stalked her and followed her and watched her on the mall and was like hiding behind whatever and like observing her. She's such a little creep. It's such like she's yeah, she talks about how she like understands not only the masculine perspective, which makes her such a brilliant writer, but also like the demented perspective. Like she says, like, I understand what it's like to be crazy and demented and a murderer, and she gets these kind of psychopathic attitudes. She can put herself in that mind, that kind of deviant perspective, and that helps her understand these realities of nature, and the balance of nature being constrained by social agreements and the social construct in a way that other writers just can't. They pretend they can't, right? They need to pretend that they're, somehow not afflicted by that awareness, in a way that obviously limits their work and their ability to be honest.
Right. And this idea of, yet again, it's also very, her grandson Bap is also very much taking the stalking pill, this idea of wandering, of searching, of hunting, right? She loves this idea of like of being on the prowl. She is an obsessive, right?
Mhm.
She's that one beautiful mix. I could see her being a spiritual hermaphrodite in the best way possible,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Because she takes this appreciation. Her will is so Apollonian and so strong in that Apollonianism. She can delve and survive discussing this Dionysian. Like that's the only way she can write about women. That beautiful line about the jellyfish. So well and so honestly is that she can embody that male obsession, right? The
Mm,
very particular male obsessiveness. Of vision, that's why she talks about the Apollonian cinema. The idea of cinema is
mm.
intrinsically Apollonian. It is the greatest work of sociopathy ever committed because it is all about obsession, documentation, and control, and basically raping of the details. It is utter dominion of the detail.
Well, and like voyeurism, like all cinema is like creepy. It's like you're watching something. It's voyeuristic. You're not supposed to be there. You get to observe. You get to stare. You get to stare at people's faces in a way that you don't in modern social life. Yeah, she gets all of that.
Right? Or actually, even earlier in yet again, we're basically just talking about the first 50 pages here. That's how in depth this is.
Yeah.
Is that she talks about the penis as both an eye and a hand. It is protruding into the world. It is seeking. It is a heat seeking missile, basically. It is both an eye and a hand. Well, this idea of the woman's vagina, women go all their lives not knowing what their vagina looks like. And that's why women see themselves through the male eye. It's always they are aware of themselves as being perceived. They cannot perceive themselves. That's why women
Mm.
have this weird obsession with masturbating in front of mirrors. Billie
Hmm.
Eilish was talking about this. It's an exclusively women thing. Like if you watch American Psycho, that scene where Patrick Bateman is flexing upon a mirror, like that's the only thing you can tell that was a female director.
Huh. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I've read the book. I'm trying to remember if that was in the book, and I can't. Um, yeah, it's funny though with the penis stuff. She also, it's not all just a powerful heat-seeking missile. Like she also, and it's amazing how well she understands the male perspective. She also is very clear about the anxiety and the performance anxiety of being a man, right? And how you're leading up to the grand moment, like he must perform, like there must be an erection, like, and the pressure of that, and how fragile, the it can be, when the moment finally comes. She's really humorous about a lot of these things.
Yeah, and a woman has power. Like she says something along, the sex nature curses man with a drive to go back to that bloody scene of the crime of his birth. you know,
Yeah.
which is it's a haunting, it's daunting. It was so funny when I was preparing for his pod, by the way, because I had back to back. I just recorded one of Han,
Hmm.
and I was reading Incel, by the way, when I was reading Sexual Persona.
Interesting.
And the one sex scene where Anon, sorry, Anon. I assume Han has sex multiple times, but Anon finally loses virginity. You can tell, like the woman is a maternal figure when he has that sex scene when he finally loses virginity. Right, the woman is entirely in control. The man is a subject. The man is fundamentally a child at
Hmm.
that point. If a woman needs to assist you with having sex, she is the guardian of a temple. And she talks about this with the poetry of John Keats, one of my favorite poets of all time, about how when in the sphere of poetry at the end of the day is the men being absorbed, engulfed. The word is engulfed because Keats hated being around women because he felt so mesmerized by women. Like, he talks
Hmm.
about in his poetry, he could, I can I can have my hands in my pockets, chilling and vibing with the boys. But when I'm ever with Fanny was the love of his life. She's always terrified that, I she will absorb me. And you can see that in his poetry, in the Ode to Melancholy, which is one of his best poems. Melancholy is a female shrine, and is only seen by him who can burst joy's grape against his palate fine. The melancholy is a female thing, and the most savory, the most delicious, the most painful sexual ecstasy you can experience is by the explosion of the life's the grape of joy's life, and you be hung. You're a trophy of the feminine. In a lot of ways, men just want to be trophies of the feminine imperative.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The last so this is the last passage I wanted to read, just from this first paragraph, first chapter. Wow, what a mic drop I think this passage is. She says, "There are no accidents, only nature throwing her weight around. Even the bomb merely releases energy that nature has put there. Nuclear war would be just a spark in the grandeur of space, nor can radiation alter nature. She will absorb it all. After the bomb, nature will pick up the cards we have spilled, shuffle them, and begin her game again. Nature is forever playing solitaire with
By
herself."
herself. I wrote down that line too,
Wow.
actually.
Wow.
It's an absolute banger of a line. It really
I
is.
mean, yeah, it's just like you realize. I mean, and that is the ultimate conclusion. Is like the Apollonian is this bounce away from nature as best we can, but ultimately, nature is the ultimate power. It's always playing solitaire with itself. No matter what happens, no matter what we create, it will rearrange the deck. It will continue its mysterious master plan. We are powerless against it. That is the source of all of our anxieties, of all of our pathologies, of all of our beautiful accomplishments.
Right. And it's the anxiety of influence, where she got from her obviously from her mentor Harold Bloom, right? The last juggernaut of any sense of real, judgment of a wise elder in the literary community was Harold Bloom, and it's just been completely disappeared of the scene, basically.
Yeah, her relationship with Bloom is great. I'm happy that he defended her and had such glowing opinions of her work, and it makes sense to me that those two were very like-minded. Given how he viewed literature and given how she views essentially humanity.
Right. But the thing is, like, he's always very glum, and he wants to appreciate beauty, but it's always from a very distance. But for her, she just digs in. She loves to dig into a piece.
Yeah, totally.
Well, this was actually fantastic. We could honestly probably do like a 12-part series just on this book alone.
Right, because we've just done the first pair. I mean, the first chapter is kind of its own thing in that it's sort of the manifesto. But yeah, like so then each of the chapters proceeding, if you haven't read Sexual Personae, she goes through essentially all of human history and will go by these little eras. So she'll talk about first Egypt, then the Greeks, then go into the Middle Ages of Spencer and Shakespeare, and then eventually into kind of the Victorian period, and then of course there's the lost Sexual Personae 2, right, where she would have picked up the thread from there and taken us to the modern day. But,
yes, we couldn't have gotten a whole book of her defending the prequels.
Yeah.
Well, to finish it off, let's end. We delved into this swampy, stinky, period blood-infested chthonic parts of Paglia. So let's swim in our semen. Let's delve into the Apollonian.
Let's not do that, Gabe.
It's the manor bund, right? It's the brotherhood, man.
Oh my god.
The strep throat meets the burning testicle, right? The burning testicle, like the Apollonian sun, right?
Yeah, wow. There's this podcast really has some like really graphic Chthonian imagery to it, which I guess that is what Paglia would have wanted.
Yeah, she hates the word. She hates the idea of word. The word, like, words fail true art in a lot of sense.
Yes.
So this section reminded me so much of a discussion that you and I had in real life, actually. So I'll read it out. I will argue that high culture made itself obsolete through modernism's neurotic nihilism, and the popular culture is the great hero of Western past. Cinema is the supreme Apollonian genre,
Mm.
thing making and thing made, a machine of the gods. Man, the sexual conceptualizer and projector, has ruled art because art is his Apollonian response towards and away from woman. A sex object is something to aim at. The eye is Apollo's arrow following the arc of transcendence. I saw in male urination and ejaculation. The Western eye is a projectile into the beyond, the wilderness of the male condition. By no coincidence, Europe first made firearms for gunpowder, which China had invented centuries earlier but found little use for. Phallic aggression and projection are intrinsic to Western conceptualization. Arrow, eyes, guns, cinema, the blazing light beam of the movie projector is our modern path of Apollonian transcendence. Cinema is the cultivation of the obsessive, mechanistic male drive in Western culture. The movie projector is an Apollonian straight shooter, demonstrating the link between aggression and art. Every pictorial framing is a ritual limitation, a bared precinct. The rectangular movie screen is clearly patterned on the post-Renaissance frame painting, but all conceptualization is a framing, which is just fantastic. And the way she describes the film projecting moonbeam as like a gun, as a projection, it reminded me, it was hilarious because I was literally, you and I were really talking about that concept,
Mhm.
because I am currently the head editor and aka sole editor of your next novel.
Yes,
uh,
yes.
and we were discussing one of your characters, and I remember bringing up this idea of the projection. The most beautiful thing of the film is actually the projected beam itself. And so when I read that paragraph, I kind of bawled laughing because I was unconsciously connecting with Mommy Paglia on that frame of reference.
Oh yeah, I mean that's so yeah, I mean I'll give a little, of course, I'm on the sidebar podcast, so I'll divulge more than I normally would. But my next, the thing I'm working on, I really want it to be a sort of to take all of Paglia's ideas, the beautiful contrast that she illuminates, and to somehow portray them in a fictionalized, modern, sort of post-college atmosphere. That is my goal, is to kind of blend those elements together.
Right, and it's the idea. Like, yet again, well, I once I read when you told me this idea for the novel, and then when I read this, I was like, oh my god, like I'm basically reading the Old Testament that you're building upon, basically.
Hopefully, we shall
Yes,
see.
yeah, and this idea, the idea of film as energy, as a life, as a, again, she even says, the movie projector is a gun, it is a speed, there's an energy to it, it is a projection, literally a projection. There's a kineticism to it.
Hmm.
That is what film should be. That was what film was created for.
Well,
And
and literally like an Apollonian object projecting an Apollonian object. It's like the ultimate, you know what I mean?
right, and the thing is, and her appreciation as a woman, I found this was actually very interesting because who was the greatest Nazi artist, right? It was Leafy Riefenstahl, right? The
Mm.
Triumph of the Will. A female bitch queen Nazi was the greatest Nazi artist. Like, I'm sorry, I like Arno Brecker, but his sculptures are kind of cartoon action figures, right? Let's be honest, right? They don't have the fluidity of Donatello, right? They're very much trying to ape the what Spengler would kind of call the sublime, like, what's it called, shallowness,
Mm.
right? Not the full body, not the full detailed individuality of the High Renaissance. And she actually makes a connection between the Renaissance and it clearly the Renaissance, which was the peak of individuality. It was the birth of the individual, as Spengler also claimed. It was the birth of the individual passions. I mean, we all remember that beautiful painting of Sebastian, right?
Mm.
Sebastian with the guy with the arrows, like he's a sexualized figure. It's clearly sexual, where he's
Mhm.
literally tied to a tree and you see his arrows piercing his chest, and it is violence as beauty. It's the same thing when you enter like some churches, Catholic churches, and you see Jesus there, and he's drenched in blood, right, with blood drenching down upon his body. There's violence as a spectacle. Violence is needed for the passions. You know what I mean?
Mm. Mm.
And so you see this of you see this idea of when she talks about this, it is an immense craving and need for an explosion. That is what film was best at. That's why the best propaganda films were generally propaganda films. It was a fire, it was burning a fire underneath your ass. The greatest of preachers of all time were fire and brimstone. Right? When a preacher in the 18th century, your ass is going to burn in hell, be sodomized for 10,000 years. There's a glorious performance of a Aryanized rage against of reality. It is in positioning upon you. Same thing with the greatest of films. You know, when you watch something like it's something as like if you have a you know you made me you demanded my top 4 films on Twitter relatively recently, and I had to embarrassingly go through my juvenilia, and yes I do like A Midnight in Paris. All right, kill me.
I do too. It's a little corny, but I'm with you. It's such a charming movie.
Listen,
Yeah.
I watched it at the very right age when I first got
Yeah.
into like literature trademark and the romanticism of it all. Before I was stone cold, I was a sensitive young romantic, believe it or not. Right, but the idea of a film is it is a she describes it from writing sexual persona. She describes it as an obelisk. It is something made out of stone. It is to say, I am here. I am above creation. I have created this. I existed, damn it. I existed no matter what chthonic energy drags me back down into the still pond of the feminine death. I existed at one point. And he wants to, every artist wants to make that thing burn bright and stand with as much weight as he could possibly put onto it,
Absolutely. And I mean, I think in people we know, amongst them, I think Paglia and appreciation for Paglia is mainstream, and even a little bit tired. But I don't feel still that she has the cultural level of reverence she should. Like as much as she is the grandmother of Dime Square or whatever, it's not the legacy she deserves. She like we said earlier, she really should be kind of enshrined as a modern philosopher. The way she has chronicled human history, the way she has illustrated it in this literary sense, she should be an immortal and she should be a household name. And so I really feel you can't shout her name from the rooftops enough,
Agreed, because she played and she wanted to be. Let's be honest, she would be an E-girl. She did love doing the interview. She loved performing. She loved the camera.
Yeah.
But her serious work, I mean, let's be honest, none of the E-girls who name drop her probably have read Sexual Persona. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, the other thing is it is dense. Like Sexual Personae is not only a book that like the font size, like it takes, I would say about it took me occasionally like 5 to 10 minutes per page, to like really comb through, because it's not the type of book that you read like a novel. It's the type of book that you should read a sentence and you should have to stop and think for like 4 minutes, about that sentence. It really is more of like that's what I mean. Like the ultimate way to use this book is less as a rule book or as a set of commandments as much as a kind of ignition to your mind, a way to like spurn you into thinking at deeper and deeper levels. You should take your time with it. You should argue and wrestle with it. You should pause often and reflect, and you have to if you're going to understand it with any clarity.
I love the fact that you use the term ignition, because this is what the book is. It's not to be read; it's to be felt. It is an engine. You can feel it purring once you actually get your head thinking. You can feel it hum. It has an energy. It has a rhythm to it. When she says she's like a musician with her work, you feel that shit, man. You feel.
Oh, absolutely.
It bursts for like. I'm curious if you were to. I know this is corny now because now is your main gimmick, but if you were to make a soundtrack for Sexual Persona, what is the songs
Yeah,
that gives
yeah.
you Paglia energy?
Yeah, no, that's such a great question. It would have to be like have you ever seen the movie Koyanis Katsi?
No, I have not.
It's this brilliant 1980s documentary. I guess it's a documentary. What it is these long shots of nature or buildings or public supermarkets or highways, and they're sped up. So you're watching like sped up sort of surveillance footage. And anyway, if you listen to the Koyanis Katsi soundtrack, it's this kind of almost pre-Christopher Nolan, Hans Zimmer type of thing, where it's it's more tribal, like it's this deep chanting, Koyanis cuts with these drums in the background and build. I think the first chapter of Sexual Personae would be much like that. The soundtrack would be a dark and brooding. It would be something that is kind of tapping into that Chthonian underworld of the dark power of nature, playing solitaire with herself. And then when the first chapter ends, it would go into a more kind of light, romantic era classical score, as we move through the Greeks to the Victorian period.
Oh, I see it, like an Orthodox dude chanting at the beginning, and then you have some like
Right.
high Richard Wagner or Gustav Host, I believe they were the beautiful romantic. I really like Jupiter, Gustav Host or Richard Wagner, and then you get something like a Jefferson Airplane. Don't you want someone to love right after that, right?
Well, that stuff would be, I think, for the Sexual Personae 2,
Ah,
ideally the sequel. Yeah.
yeah, no, the sequel that you know what, the sequel's in our hearts.
Yeah.
We are the ultimate form of art. We are the ultimate form of anxiety influence because we are the living embodiment of Sexual Persona 2.
Wonderfully said, Gabriel. Yeah. I mean, if you read this book right, if she infects your mind in the way that all art should, then, Sexual Personae 2 should be your ability to perceive and analyze pop culture along these beautiful contrasts.
Yeah, actually, to use the volcano, that scene in Fight Club where he talks about the ashes of all the burnt soldiers were used
Hmm.
to make the first soap. I feel like the volcano energy, her burst of energy, that sexual persona, all the leftover ass of that explosion of her relevance in society. We've used that ash to make our bread and to make our soap. Her
Hmm.
her energy, her kinetic energy feeds us and cleanses us. To live upon the earth with a fresh new state of being.
Amen. Amen.
Amen to that. All right. Well, this was a fantastic grab bag, I'd say. Obviously, I think you'll probably be a recurring guest. Needless to say, I think we have a good energy. I think this went pretty good, actually.
Lovely. I mean, what an honor to talk about such a beautiful text alongside such a sprawling and expansive mind as Mr. Gabriel Underground. Always an honor to be on the Sidebar podcast. I had a lovely time. Yeah.
Yes,
Thanks
this
for
was
having me on.
fantastic. Yeah, well, hopefully each time we do this, we don't have to be sick. Hopefully I don't have to get an STD each time I talk to you.
Yeah, let's both end this podcast and get ourselves some antibiotics.
Yeah. Yeah, next time when we do the Apollonian section, we'll make sure to be nice and clean for him. All right, everyone. Good night and keep tugging.
So yeah.